Hello, viewers. Tonight, we delve into the icy depths of winter's chill, where the line between truth and terror blurs like frost on a windowpane. Prepare yourselves for 3 true winter night horror stories. Before starting these horror stories, please like this video, tell us in the comments which story you liked, and subscribe our YouTube channel for more horror stories. Story number 1. John hunched against the icy wind, pulling his collar tighter around his neck. Dallas winters weren't typically this brutal, but tonight the wind howled like a banshee, tearing through the skeletal branches of the sprawling oak forest behind their suburban home. He squinted through the swirling snow, a knot of unease twisting in his gut. His wife, Sarah, had called him home from work in a panic, claiming she'd heard whispers coming from the woods. Whispers that weren't the wind. John wasn't a superstitious man, but something about Sarah's frantic voice, the urgency in her pleas, sent shivers down his spine. Leaving his half-eaten sandwich abandoned on his desk, he'd rushed home, finding Sarah huddled in the living room, eyes wide with terror, their kids clinging to her like frightened kittens. The whispers. They were faint, barely audible over the winter's fury, but they were there. Wispy tendrils of sound that seemed to slither around the edges of his consciousness, just beyond comprehension. John strained to hear, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. At first, he chalked it up to his overactive imagination, the wind playing tricks on his ears. But then he heard it too. A guttural murmur, a whisper that sent a primal fear coursing through him. "Come, play." Hesitantly, John reached for the old hunting rifle hanging above the fireplace, a relic from his grandfather's days. Sarah's hand shot out, her fingers icy on his wrist. "No, John, don't. It's something else. Something we can't fight." Her fear was palpable, a thick fog in the air. But John, fueled by a fierce protectiveness towards his family, wouldn't back down. He grabbed a flashlight and, ignoring Sarah's protests, stepped out into the howling storm. The snow muffled his footsteps, turning the world into a silent, monochrome dreamscape. The wind snatched at his breath, icy fingers clawing at his face. The whispers seemed to grow louder, swirling around him like a malevolent vortex. He pushed on, deeper into the woods, the moonlight filtering through the dense canopy, casting grotesque shadows that danced around him. He tripped over a gnarled root, landing hard on the frozen ground. As he scrambled to his feet, a sense of wrongness settled over him, thick and suffocating. The air grew colder, an unnatural chill that seeped into his bones. Then he saw it, a clearing bathed in an eerie greenish glow. In the center, swirling like smoke, was a pulsating mass of darkness, tendrils of shadow reaching out like grasping claws. And from its depths, the whispers grew into a cacophony of inhuman shrieks, a symphony of terror that tore at his sanity. Panic clawed at his throat, but John forced himself to stand, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He raised the rifle, aiming at the swirling darkness. His finger tightened on the trigger, but just as he was about to shoot, a guttural roar ripped through the night. Something monstrous emerged from the shadows, a towering figure wreathed in darkness, its form shifting and pulsating like a monstrous, inky heartbeat. Razor-sharp claws gleamed in the moonlight, and eyes like burning embers locked onto John. He fired, the bullet disappearing into the creature's inky flesh with a wet plop. It didn't even flinch. The thing lunged, wrapping its shadowy limbs around John, crushing the air from his lungs. He screamed, the sound lost in the howling wind. His vision blurred, the edges of his world dissolving into black. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The creature recoiled, releasing him with a shriek that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. It retreated back into the swirling darkness, its form dissipating into nothingness. John collapsed onto the snow, gasping for breath. His body ached, his face stinging with cold and fear. He lay there, trembling, until the faintest hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. Then, with a groan, He scrambled to his feet and raced back home. Sarah pulled him into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. The children, still wide-eyed with terror, clung to his legs. They were safe for now. But John knew. He had seen something that night, something that defied explanation, something that lurked just beyond the edge of darkness, waiting for its next opportunity. From that day on, a shadow hung over their lives. The whispers had ceased, but the memory of the creature, the cold dread that had gripped him. Story number 2. The January wind howled like a banshee outside their Phoenix apartment, rattling the old-fashioned window panes with icy fingers. Richard pulled the thick covers tighter around himself and Patricia, his wife of 10 years, snuggling deeper into the warmth. A soft sigh escaped Patricia's lips as she nestled into his side, her rhythmic breathing lulling him into a drowsy peace. He kissed her forehead, the scent of lavender shampoo tickling his nose, momentarily banishing the winter's harsh bite. Suddenly, a guttural shriek ripped through the night, tearing the blanket of his contentment to shreds. Richard sat bolt upright, heart hammering against his ribs. It came again, sharper this time, laced with malice, echoing through the apartment like the cries of tortured souls. Patricia stirred, her eyes widening in alarm as a cold tendril of air snaked down her spine. The shriek morphed into a chorus of whispers, slithering around them like unseen serpents. Panic seized Richard. He grabbed the lantern from the nightstand, its flickering flame throwing grotesque shadows on the walls. In the corner, a gnarled oak rocking chair swayed on its own, as if an unseen hand rocked it back and forth. "Richard," Patricia whimpered, her voice barely a whisper against the cacophony of shrieks. He swallowed hard, his throat constricting with fear. "Stay here, honey," he forced out, his voice tight. "Don't move." Taking a deep breath, he crept towards the source of the noise. The living room. Each step felt like wading through treacle, the whispers growing louder, prickling his skin with goosebumps. As he entered the room, the lantern light glinted off something unnatural. 3 shadowy figures hunched over the coffee table, their forms wispy and shifting like smoke. Their eyes, burning red embers in the darkness, met his. A scream died in his throat, replaced by a primal fear that chilled him to the bone. The figures lunged, their cold, grasping hands reaching for him. Richard stumbled back, his foot catching on the rug. He fell, the lantern clattering to the floor, extinguished. Darkness swallowed him whole. The whispers became taunts, their touch icy tendrils snaking down his arms, draining him of warmth. He tasted fear, metallic and cold on his tongue. But then, a memory surfaced, a faint echo from his childhood, his father's weathered face, gruff voice reciting an ancient incantation. Desperation fueled his voice. "I banish you back to the void," he rasped, the words forming awkwardly on his tongue. "By the sun and the moon, by fire and wind, I bind you to their essence." The air crackled with sudden energy. The shadows convulsed, hissing in fury. But the incantation held, drawing on some primal power deep within him. The icy grip on his limbs loosened, the whispers fading into anguished cries. Then, with a final shriek, the shadows disintegrated into wisps of smoke, sucked into the swirling vortex before him. Light rushed back, blinding after the darkness. Richard lay on the floor, panting, sweat matting his hair. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady thump of his own heart. He scrambled to his feet, searching the room for any trace of the evil. All that remained was the lingering stench of burning ash and the overturned furniture. He found Patricia huddled on the couch, eyes wide with shock and relief. He pulled her into a tight embrace, the warmth of her body grounding him back to reality. Later, huddled beneath the blankets, as dawn painted the sky with a pale canvas of gray, Richard told Patricia about the ritual, about the shadows that had stalked them. She listened, her hand clutching his tightly, her eyes wide with a newfound wonder. The following days were filled with the echo of that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent shivers down his spine. Yet, a deep sense of peace settled over them. They had faced the darkness and emerged, bonded closer than ever before, their love a shield against the unseen horrors that lurked in the shadows. The winter of that year remained etched in their memory, a stark reminder of the night they battled evil, not with swords or guns, but with the whispered words of an ancient ritual and the unyielding strength of their love. And even as the sun shone warm on their faces and the whisper of spring breezes replaced the winter's howl, they knew that in the deepest corners of their hearts, the echoes of that night and the shadows it conjured would forever linger. Story number 3. The frosty breath that escaped Lopez's lips mirrored the January night settling over Mount Rainier. Washington's winter cloak seemed thicker tonight, pressing against the cozy log cabin nestled amongst the snow-laden pines. Inside, the embers in the fireplace crackled a nervous counterpoint to the wind's mournful howl. Lopez sat by Elizabeth, her wife, their bodies entwined on the worn leather sofa. Elizabeth's head rested on Lopez's shoulder, her sleep deep and untroubled, a stark contrast to the unease gnawing at Lopez's gut. It began a week ago, subtle things at first. Unexplained chills despite the roaring fire, whispers in the woods that weren't the wind, fleeting shadows at the edge of vision. Then, the radio went silent, and the television sputtered out, leaving them only with the crackling fire and the gnawing shadows. The town of Winthrop seemed eerily quiet, phones dead, streets deserted. Now, Lopez couldn't shake the feeling they were alone, not just in the cabin, but in the world. Tonight, the unease turned to terror. A guttural shriek, unlike anything Lopez had ever heard, ripped through the night. Elizabeth stirred, her eyes wide and mirroring Lopez's fear. They stared at each other, hearts hammering against ribs, the silence amplifying the shriek again. This time, closer. Lopez scrambled for the antique shotgun hanging above the fireplace, its worn wood a cold comfort in her trembling hands. She loaded the weapon, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. Elizabeth, pale but resolute, grabbed a heavy poker from the hearth. They huddled together, backs against the wall, eyes straining into the darkness beyond the flickering lamplight. The shrieks came again, punctuated by the thumps of something monstrous against the cabin walls. The old wood creaked under the assault, threatening to splinter. Suddenly, a dark shape, impossibly large and twisted, lumbered into the lamplight. Its fur, matted with ice and grime, bristled with malice. Two glowing eyes, the color of embers gone cold, met theirs. A monstrous maw, dripping with fetid drool, gaped wide. In the blink of an eye, Lopez fired. The boom of the shotgun seemed to shake the cabin itself. The creature recoiled, but only for a moment. It roared, a sound that shook the floorboards, and lunged with inhuman speed. Elizabeth swung the poker, connecting with a sickening thud, but the blow barely seemed to faze the beast. The firelight danced on the chaos. Lopez fumbled for another shell, her hands slick with fear and sweat. Elizabeth wrestled with the creature, her screams mingling with the snarls. Lopez fired again, then again, each shot echoing in the confined space. The air grew thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Finally, with a guttural howl, the creature stumbled back, its eyes dimming. It stumbled against the wall, then crumbled onto the floorboards, its massive form convulsing briefly before lying still. Lopez and Elizabeth, battered and panting, stood huddled over the beast's corpse, adrenaline masking the pain of their wounds. They remained like that for what felt like an eternity, the silence as heavy as the weight of their shared survival. Then, Elizabeth's hand touched Lopez's, a silent message of gratitude and love. As Lopez squeezed back, a sob escaped her lips, releasing the fear that had choked her. Dawn found them huddled by the dying fire, tending to each other's wounds. The cabin was a mess, a testament to the night's terror, but they were alive. Outside, the world seemed unchanged, the sun glinting off the pristine snow. Yet, they knew everything had changed. They had faced something ancient and monstrous, something that stalked the winter wilds of Washington, and they had, miraculously, survived. The radio remained silent, the phones dead. But now, when the wind whispered through the pines, they didn't hear mere cold, but the echo of a battle won, a reminder of the terror and the love that had carried them through. They knew they might not understand the secrets the mountains held, but they also knew they were no longer alone. They had each other, and in that fierce embrace, they found a fortress against the shadows, a light in the winter's cold heart. Lopez never spoke of the creature again, not to Elizabeth, not to anyone. It became their shared secret, a chilling lullaby against the backdrop of their lives. They stayed in the cabin, their bond tempered by the fire of that night. They learned to read the whispers of the wind, the warnings in the rustling leaves. They found solace in the quiet strength of the mountains, a resilience mirrored in their own. Years passed, seasons turned, and the memory of the creature faded into a winter's tale whispered around crackling fires. Elizabeth and Lopez grew old gracefully. Our winter night horror stories are over. Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more horror stories. Thanks for watching.